She walked into the studio using a cane. She struggled to remember the names of people she had known for decades. And when the photographer asked her to hold her Oscar, the one she had won 50 years earlier at the age of 10, something shifted in the room. She held it up. She smiled. And her son, standing off to the side, watching his mother hold the award that had defined and destroyed and defined her again, shouted across the room, "You look like a movie star." She beamed. She shouted back, "Kevin, I love you." And everyone in that room leaned in, because watching Tatum O'Neal be alive, truly, stubbornly, against every odd alive, is one of the most extraordinary things you will ever witness. Tatum Beatrice O'Neal was born on November 5, 1963, in the Westwood area of Los Angeles. She is the daughter of actor Ryan O'Neal and actress Joanna Moore, two people who were talented, troubled, and completely incapable of providing the stable childhood their daughter desperately needed. By the time Tatum was 4 years old, her parents had divorced. By the time she was 6, she was being shuttled between a mother too unstable to parent and a father too volatile to trust. By the time she was 8, she had already seen things no child should ever see. And by the time she was 10, she was the most famous child in America. In 1973, director Peter Bogdanovich cast her in Paper Moon, a Depression-era road comedy about a con man and the scrappy orphan girl he reluctantly takes under his wing. The con man was played by her father, Ryan O'Neal. The orphan girl, sharper, funnier, more alive on screen than anyone around her, was Tatum. She was 9 years old during filming. She turned 10 the following spring. And on April 2, 1974, wearing a tuxedo she had chosen herself, inspired by style icon Bianca Jagger, Tatum O'Neal walked up to the podium at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion and accepted the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress. She became the youngest person in the history of the Academy Awards to win a competitive Oscar, a record she still holds today, a record that will almost certainly never be broken. Her father was not there. He was in Ireland filming Stanley Kubrick is Barry Lyndon and would not come back for the ceremony. She was escorted by her grandparents. She stood alone on that stage at 10 years old, the most famous child in the world, and did it by herself. That moment tells you everything about her life, the extraordinary achievement, the absent father, and Tatum standing alone in the middle of it, doing it anyway. After Paper Moon, the world expected more. And for a while it seemed like more was coming. The Bad News Bears in 1976. International Velvet in 1978. Little Darlings in 1980. She was working, she was visible, and she was quietly falling apart in ways nobody on set could see. Her father had become the defining wound of her life. She wrote about it years later in her 2004 memoir A Paper Life, one of the most honest and harrowing accounts of a Hollywood childhood ever committed to the page. She wrote that after Paper Moon was released and critics declared Tatum the standout, better than her father in her father's own film, Ryan O'Neal hit her. Out of jealousy, his 10-year-old daughter had outshone him and he punished her for it. She wrote that by the time she hit puberty, Ryan did not like her, that he had been hitting her and headbutting her for years, that by 16 she was living alone in a Los Angeles apartment, abandoned by the father who would not let her go, running with a fast crowd, crashing cars, doing drugs, surviving. Ryan O'Neal denied the allegations. He always denied them. He died in December 2023 without ever giving her the apology she had spent 60 years waiting for. And in a final act that stunned people who thought they had already heard the worst, she learned after his death that he had cut her out of his will entirely. The first love of her life had left her with nothing. But Tatum O'Neal is not a woman who stays down. She never has been. And what she survived in the years that followed and what she looks like at 62 is the real story. In 1984, Tatum O'Neal met John McEnroe. He was 25 years old and the best tennis player on the planet. Aggressive, brilliant, famously difficult. A man whose volcanic temper had made him as notorious as his backhand. She was 20 years old and already deep inside a cocaine addiction she had been managing since her teens. They were absolutely wrong for each other in every way that mattered, and absolutely magnetic to each other in every other way. They married in August 1986. They had 3 children, Kevin, Sean, and Emily. And from almost the beginning, behind the glamour of one of the most high-profile marriages in America, things were brutal. Tatum wrote about it in A Paper Life with the same unflinching honesty she brought to everything. She said she had married her father. Not literally, but in every psychological way that counted. A powerful, volatile man who could make her feel protected and worthless in the same afternoon. A man whose temper she had learned to read the way she had learned to read Ryan O'Neal's moods as a child, watching for the signs, bracing for the impact. She said John McEnroe was a better man than her father. She said he was decent underneath everything. But she also said that the marriage had been purgatory, and that what came after it was hell. They separated in 1992. The divorce was finalized in 1994. And when it was over, when the structure that had held her together and held her down simultaneously was gone, everything Tatum O'Neal had been managing in private came rushing to the surface. She turned to heroin. After the divorce, when she was in her 30s, the drugs that had always been present in her life escalated into something she could no longer control. And the moment she knew she had hit the absolute bottom was the day her 7-year-old daughter Emily walked into her bedroom and found a syringe. That image, a little girl standing in a doorway holding a syringe, was the thing that finally broke through. Tatum called John McEnroe. She said, "You need to take the kids. I need to get help." He took custody of all 3 children in 1998. And Tatum went to rehab. She got clean. Then she relapsed. Then got clean again. This is what addiction actually looks like. Not the movie version with one dramatic rock bottom and a clean recovery, but the grinding real version where you fight the same battle over and over and sometimes lose and get back up anyway. She was arrested in 2008 for buying crack cocaine near her Manhattan apartment. She pleaded guilty to disorderly conduct and completed drug treatment. She kept going. Through all of it, she was battling something else entirely. Rheumatoid arthritis had been quietly destroying her body for years. Her hands stopped working. She could not tie her shoes. She needed surgery on her knee and her neck. The disease that attacks the joints had taken hold of a woman who had already been through more physical and emotional damage than most people could survive. And it kept attacking. And then in May 2020, in the middle of a global pandemic, alone in her Century City apartment, Tatum O'Neal overdosed on morphine prescribed by her doctor for the arthritis pain. She suffered a severe stroke. She fell into a coma that lasted 6 weeks. When she woke up, she could not talk. She could not walk. She could not see. She had aphasia, a condition caused by brain damage that affects the ability to speak, read, and understand language. The woman who had delivered one of the most memorable performances in the history of American cinema at the age of 9 could not find the words for the names of the people she loved. Her son Kevin later wrote about receiving the call that his mother might not survive. He wrote that he had long feared this moment, that he had spent years answering every call from her because he was terrified that the one time he did not answer would be the time she needed him most. And then there was a call he did not answer. And she had nearly died. He answered every call after that. And she fought her way back from the edge of something that should have taken her. The recovery from the stroke was longer and harder than anything Tatum O'Neal had ever faced. And she had faced things that would have finished most people before she was 25. Speech therapy, physical therapy, cognitive therapy, relearning words she had known all her life. Relearning how to read. Relearning how to move through a world that had kept moving without her during the 6 weeks she lay in a coma. Kevin later wrote, with a love and a heartbreak woven so tightly together you cannot separate them, that when she came out of the coma she could not read but she started drinking again. That line is devastating. That a woman who had just survived a near-fatal stroke, who had just fought her way back from the edge of death, reached for alcohol again before she could reach for a book. Addiction does not care that you almost died. That is the truth that everyone who loves an addict already knows, and that everyone who has never loved one cannot fully understand. But here is what else is true. She kept going. She went to therapy. She worked on her speech. She worked on her mobility. She worked on her memory, because the aphasia took words she had owned for 60 years and scattered them in ways she is still recovering. She told Variety in a 2025 interview that she still struggles to remember certain names, that her son stands beside her and fills in the gaps when the words will not come, that she sometimes reaches for a name and finds only silence where the word used to live. And yet, in June 2025, 5 years after the stroke that should have killed her, Tatum O'Neal stood up at her son Kevin's wedding and gave a speech. She stood in front of family and friends and the woman Kevin was marrying, actress Fern Kazin, and she spoke. She thanked Kevin's father and stepmother for having her. She told a bit of her wild life story, which Kevin said she cannot seem to help. She spoke of a future filled with love, hope, and joy. Kevin wrote about it afterward with an emotion he barely tried to contain. He said his mother, who had suffered a stroke that left her temporarily nonverbal and immobile but who fought her way back with grit and at times a kind of abridged elegance, got up and gave a speech. He said she was brave and gracious. He said he was proud of her for doing so. That is the most important sentence in the entire story of Tatum O'Neal's life. Not the Oscar, not the arrest, not the coma. A son saying, "I was proud of her." A son who had spent decades alternately calling her mom and calling her Tatum, because sometimes the woman who raised him and the woman lost to addiction felt like two different people. Standing at his wedding and watching his mother be brave. In May 2026, just days before Mother's Day, Kevin published an open letter about their relationship. It was raw and honest and full of love that had been earned through decades of complicated, painful, real devotion. He wrote, "When I was little you were my mom until your boyfriend gave you heroin. You were my mom when you were clean between rehabs. But today I can call you mama. And I do. Today I can call you mama." That is where the story lands. Not in the Oscar. Not in the addiction. Not in the stroke or the coma or the 6 weeks her children held their breath. It lands in a son who chose to stay, who answered every call, who stood behind his mother at a photo shoot and watched her hold her Oscar and shouted across the room, "You look like a movie star," and meant it. Tatum O'Neal is 62 years old. She walks with a cane. She sometimes loses words mid-sentence. She is still in therapy. She is still recovering. She told CBS News in May 2026, "The best years are still ahead of me." She has said that before. She has believed it before and then had the ground open beneath her. But this time, standing on the other side of a stroke and a coma and 50 years of surviving things that should have broken her, this time it sounds different. This time it sounds true.